Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest today is engineer Lenise Bent. First of all, metal has never gone away, unlike many other genres that have really diminished over the years. Metal, in fact, continues to be more popular than ever, even though it may be slightly under the radar for the most part. According to Chartmatic, which is a service that analyzes all the charts, metal acts still pack stadiums and actually make more money than big pop acts like Ed Sheeran and Kenny Chesney or Harry Styles. Not only that, metal fans buy more physical albums, CDs, vinyl, just about anything they can get their hands on by the band, merch, they'll buy anything, and as a result, metal is thriving on a financial level as well. So Chartmatic looked to find out where most of this was happening, and they found that there were a number of cities across the world where metal especially was big. They're probably not what you expect. Chicago's number one, then Mexico City, followed by Helsinki, Santiago, Chile, Sydney, and Brisbane. In Finland, they actually have the highest number of metal bands per capita, which isn't too surprising because that's the home of so many metal subgenres. Now, here's what's really surprising. The top metal bands, and this is based on the number of Spotify listeners and followers that they have. Number one is Linkin Park. Number two, Guns N' Roses. Number three, Metallica. Number four, System of a Down. Number five, Nickelback. That's kind of surprising. Number six, Black Sabbath. Number seven, Kiss. 8 is Slipknot. 9, Scorpions. And number 10 is a newer band, Bring Me the Horizon. Following up close behind is another new band, relatively new band, Ghost. So lots of music genres aren't what they used to be, but metal keeps on thriving, and it shows no signs of slowing down. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. Also, I'm pleased to announce that the 5th edition of my Mixing Engineer's Handbook is now available. It's totally updated and includes new sections on mixing and immersive audio, self-mastering, new mixer interviews, and much more. Get your copy at a special discounted price at bobbyowsinski.com/handbook. That's bobbyowsinski.com/handbook. You can also find it on Amazon and Apple Books. And remember, you can learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news when you sign up for my newsletter at bobbyowsinski.com. There you'll also find out about openings for my latest online classes and special events. That's bobbyowsinski.com. Now here's something that's, again, really interesting, I thought. The death of key changes. Turns out if you go back and look at every Billboard Hot 100 number one hit between 1958 and 1990, a number of things pop out. The first thing is the key of the song. G major was a really popular key, mostly because it's easy to work with on a guitar and a piano, and those are the two most popular compositional instruments during those years anyway. In fact, across the decades, we see keys that are convenient for those instruments like C major and G major, D major, and less so keys that have lots of black keys like B major and G flat major. But what's more significant than this is that 23% of number one hits between 1958 and 1990 had multiple keys. So in other words, there was a key change within the song, usually towards the end. So it shifted either up a whole or a half step. This is sometimes known as a modulation. The thing about it is that after 1990, hit songs have very few key changes, if at all. Songwriters began to use all keys pretty much at the same time, instead of relying on G or C or D. Well, it doesn't matter what the key is, and there's a few reasons for this. The first is DAWs came into being, and now the method of songwriting was way different because you used to write a song very linearly, section to section to section to section, and now it's vertical. If you look at the lanes on a digital audio workstation, and if you look at the fact that so much song construction is based around short loops, you find that it's kind of inconvenient or unnecessary to do key changes. But another big thing that happened was the fact that the rise of hip-hop changed all this. Because if someone is rapping, a key change doesn't much matter. So you can change the key, but the excitement doesn't necessarily change as well. Where if you're singing, that tends to happen, especially if it goes up, because all of a sudden the singer is straining a little bit more and there's more emotion. Not so when it comes to rap, hip-hop. So key changes used to be a powerful production tool for raising excitement in a song, but they very well may be a thing of the past. My guest this week is Lenise Bent, who is one of a handful of women working in the Hollywood recording studio business in a technical role during the 1970s, and was the first woman to receive an RIAA Platinum album for her engineering of AutoAmerican by Blondie. While working as an assistant at Village Recorder, Lenise worked on a number of classic albums, including Asia by Steely Dan, Breakfast in America by Supertramp, and Tusk by Fleetwood Mac. She then became chief engineer for producer Mike Chapman, working on albums by Blondie, the Knack and Suzi Quatro. Lenise eventually moved over to post-production sound, where she worked as a sound editor, sound supervisor, and re-recording mixer on films like Shrek, Spirit, and Shrek 2. During the interview, we spoke about her getting her start as an assistant at Village Recorders, working on Steely Dan's Asia album, being chief engineer for producer Mike Chapman, getting sick from the intense work schedule, starting back at the bottom in post, and much more. I spoke with Lenise from her office in Los Angeles via Zoom. Let's go back to the beginning. I want to know about the early you and how you got into the business.
Oh my gosh. Well, how far back do you want to go? I started in the Screen Children's Guild when I was 8 years old, and growing up here in Los Angeles, Compton, actually. And so that, wet my whistle a little bit that way. Also, I had technical people in my family and musical people in my family. So, it just all came together then. So I studied film in school, and then my boyfriend had a band, and his guitar player, Roger Lynn, was engineering for Leon Russell. And Leon back then had a home studio that nobody had back then. And I got invited over there, and I was so excited because I was a huge Leon Russell fan. And when I walked into the house, which was now a recording studio, that was the first time I'd really been in a recording studio and had no idea. I'd never given any thought to how records were made, or, I just loved them. And when I walked in, and where the dining room used to be was a control room, and saw the console and the Stevens 40-track tape machine and the monitors and outboard gear, but heard this fabulous music coming from a record they were working on, Will o' the Wisp. It was like the angels smiled on me, and I got hit by lightning, and it was my epiphany. And I just said, whoa, show me how to work this thing. And I dropped out of university and found a recording school and told my parents the next day. And fortunately, my dad was dean of an aerospace institute, Northrop University. And so he understood the technical quality of a training like that. Back then, that was kind of blue collar work and, trade training and things. You went to university or you became a tradesman. And we know that's not true anymore. And so, but I had a support, so I liked that. And so I went to Soundmasters recording school, and I was the only girl and 50 guys for the first night. And that dwindled down as time went on. But they didn't have actual gear or whatever. It was just in a ballroom, and they were just talking about sound. And it was like Chinese to me. And I freaked, and I went, oh God, I've blown it really bad. I don't know what this is about. And amplitude and velocity and Doppler effect and all these things. So I called Roger in a panic, and he said, oh, come over. So the next day I went back over to Leon's house, and Roger was kind enough to say, this is an LA two-way and it's a compressor, and this is what compression sounds like, and ran some, music through there, and I got to play with it. And here's an 1176, and this is equalization, and this is what attack and release mean, and this is, your ratio, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, point being, I had the great opportunity to go to school Monday and Wednesday night, and then go over to Leon's Tuesdays and Thursdays to, put into play what I had heard about the night before. And then when we did have our labs for sound masters was actually in real studios like Capitol and Conway. So that was great, because back then the recording schools didn't have the brick and mortar rooms made just for the schools with all the latest and greatest. And so I had that great opportunity as well. So I think the universe just wanted me to do this and just cleared the path. And because I was so myopic about it, as I tell people, I didn't need people to tell me no, I needed them to tell me how. And I sought out those opportunities, and I was just relentless about it. And then I graduated and got a job at the Village Recorder, now Village Studios, as an assistant. And I got hired the same day as another girl assistant. And there was one before. Terry Becker was already there for 2 months. And then a month or so later, Carla Frederick showed up. And I got hired with Barbara Isaac so there were 4 women out of the 6 assistants at the Village. That hadn't happened before, and probably hasn't happened quite like that since. But
Village has always been progressive like that, though. Mm-hmm. Every time I've worked there, there's always been female assistants.
Well, Jeff has carried on Geordie Hormel's vision as far as that goes, because Geordie, the original owner and creator of the Village, it was his idea to have women there. He felt that it added a lot of positive energy. We were organized. He didn't think our egos would get in the way of, the artist or the project. And maybe that sounds sexist or something, but whatever, I'm grateful for the opportunity. And we proved ourselves. All 4 of us went on to do headlong careers. I'm the only one left, sadly. They've all passed. But so I carry on the torch for them.
Yeah. How long were you at Village?
3 years.
You worked on a lot of great projects in the meantime, huh?
Boy, did I luck out. And timing was everything on that one. Yes. It was all great projects. I mean, there were good ones, there were great ones and greater ones. And because back then, any artist who went into a studio like that had to have already proven to a record label that they were worth investing in. And so the only people who came into the door who weren't those people were somebody with a whole lot of money and wanted to do a karaoke thing or, something like that. But that was, few and far between. Everybody was, had enormous budgets back then. It was the height of the music recording industry. When I look back, I don't see any other time that was so affluent as it was back then, and it was about to crash, and it did.
Yeah. What was your first project?
Well, the first day I got there, they put me on it was an Alice Coltrane tracking date. I'll never forget it, of course, because it was just so monumental, and the integrity of the musicianship and the production and engineering. And so I started my first day there. But there are a lot of other projects going on. I was kind of trained. It took a while, for me to get my sea legs. So I would assist assistants in other sessions. So I guess the first thing that I was left on my own on was with the band, and they were doing the Last Waltz, the pickups and mixes and things like that weren't from the actual live performance. so that was cool. And then so whenever the band came into the village, I got to be their assistant, and that was wonderful. They would do all sorts of stuff. And then I worked on a variety of things, but it all kind of trained me for the big one, which was the Asia album by Steely Dan. That was my first big project. I worked on that for 10 and a half months.
Wow. Okay, tell me a little bit about that, because till the end, they were known for their precision and the fact that they would settle for nothing less than the best, which can drive a lot of people crazy when you're going through something like that. But how did you see it?
Well, I didn't know much different. I was still a newbie, and Roger Nichols was my main mentor. And so he showed me it. We knew this was going to be a long haul. And so he was very mindful at showing me all his recording techniques and things that made the minutia that made a Steely Dan record sound the way it does. And, he wouldn't, these are mic cables, my hand, no mic cables touched, use the shortest mic cable possible, and all those little things, having the cleanest signal flow. So all of those techniques are, still highly used in my toolbox. They didn't want it perfect. They wanted it right. That's what Donald used to say. I don't want it perfect. I want it right, which is harder than perfect because, especially now in the digital world, you can quantize everything, you move everything around, blah, 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 blah. That's not what being right was. And that wasn't perfect for him. So yeah, there was a lot of what some people would think was quite tedious and quite nerve-wracking, and the sort of thing that other people would say, nobody's going to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I hear it, and they heard it, and we would always hear it if it wasn't what they wanted. And so, yeah, it was intense. Sometimes it was pure magic, like when Wayne Shorter came in to do his sax solo on Asia. That was unbelievable. And he did about 6 takes, just boom, boom, boom. And they comped it, and he was out by noon, I think. and there it was. So there were those moments too, a lot of magical moments.
Wow. I bet. What did you do after Village then?
Well, I left the Village because I got hired by Mike Chapman to be his engineer. He was at that time, I think in Bam Magazine, he was producer of the year or whatever. And so with Blondie and the Knack, and, he'd done Sweet and Mud and, a bunch of bands, and very pop, very different way of doing things than I had been exposed to. He wanted a woman engineer, and he wanted to make me the first female producer. That was his goal, and that was what he offered me, and sounded good to me. Nobody else said, I hadn't even thought about that, but that actually was a really good area for me to go into. And he was an amazing producer. I mean, he's really out there and crazy, but boy, he knows what he's talking about. And I learned so much about production from him. I learned so much from everybody I got to work with. I worked with just so many great people. I'm so fortunate because of the Village. And then I became Mike's. That was a completely different approach. And I use a lot of those tools now, and I'm very grateful to him for all I learned from him.
You say it's a different approach, but how so?
Well, he worked very fast. He had a grid. He also wrote a lot of the songs, or he'd write a song, and then he'd put a band together for it. Or he would write with a band member, or, it was about creating the music as well as they didn't come in polished or come in with everything complete. He really participated on so many levels. So I learned how to do things quickly, how to production wise, also certain things not to do, which was creating a certain emotion with an artist or whatever. There was that school of thought where some producers feel you have to get somebody mad or upset or something to get that performance out of them. And then, after they've reduced them to a puddle and had them sing like they hated them and then say, "Oh, thank you. That was it. I'm sorry. I had to do that. I had to get." Well, I never bought that.
Yeah.
And I'm more about empowering ahead of time.
Ken Scott told me a story about working with Richard Perry, and Richard felt that no matter how good the musicians were, they never copped the feel until they hit 30-some takes, and they were so tired and sick of the song. And then they'd take a break, and he felt that then they could actually track. As a result, they hated him for it, as you can imagine.
Well, there were some very notorious producers back then. I mean, Val Garay was one, Richard Perry, Kim Fowley, Mike Chapman. They were all these enormous personalities that were known for their madness and kind of scary, but they did deliver.
Yeah.
And Phil Spector also had that same approach too, it seemed, and a few people have done that. I love to inspire first, like talk about the song. What makes you, what was it about this song? Or tell me what made you write this song. How are you feeling? And blah, 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 blah. And they tell me the story and I get them back into that place. And then we go out and, oh man, just do that.
Yeah.
Tell me that story, and I like that initial energy and emotion is what I want. I don't necessarily want it perfect, but I want it right.
Yeah, right.
And to me, that's right. And then you can fix things here and there.
You had some health issues then when you were working with Mike, right?
I did, because we were working like crazy, so all we did was work. And 14, 18-hour days, 6 days a week, finish one album on a Friday, rehearse on the weekend and started another one on Monday. And it wasn't a healthy environment. And I had no balance in my life. And I ended up getting cancer. And out of stress, out of, this is just too much. And my body just said, well, if you're not smart enough to take care of you, I'm going to step in here. And so I got diagnosed with cancer about a record and a half before our Blondie album was coming up. And that was on a different label. Mike had his own label, Dreamland Records. So there were we had like 8 artists that we were just cranking records out for them, along with a rock record for Cher and all that. There were other things in between as well. And so it was just constant. And I just I burned out and got sick. And but I made it through the Blondie record. That was my goal. I wanted that record. It's called AutoAmerican, and we had a blast doing it. And I love that record, but boy, was I sick. And Debbie Harry was so cool. She'd bring me, she was macrobiotic, so she'd bring me brown rice and veggies and things like that. And the day after we mastered the record, I drove down to Mexico, and the doctor said, "Quit your job or die." So that's where Lenise went. Here I had this trajectory going, boom. And so I'm grateful I got to be the first woman documented to make a platinum album. But then it was like, I didn't work for 8 years.
Wow. Then you went into post after that, right?
Yeah. I had a great opportunity to get well holistically. And so I pretty much spent a lot of time down in the Caribbean doing boat deliveries, getting my ex and I, at the time, he was my future ex. We lived on a sailboat in Los Angeles, and then we had a place down there. And so I would go down there, and I would somebody needed a crew for a boat to go from one island to another. And that was very healing. And that was just one of many things. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And so when I came back, when he was now my ex, I came back and went to work, and just the thought of putting myself back in that music business, stress, and there was some PTSD involved in that, and so many people during that time had left the music business and gone into post because the music business kind of tanked, and we're getting older, and you wanted something a little more secure or whatever, and paid well, and so I was able to, through colleagues who had made the switch, get into doing post. And my first post gig was working on the entire Disney cartoon catalog, creating foreign music and effects tracks for those. So that means, they take out the English dialogue. And so you have to fill in the holes with music, sound effects, Foley, and optical noise. So it sounds exactly like the cartoon soundtrack, except nobody says anything. So they can dub it in any language they want.
Yeah.
So foreign M&Es, as they're called, are just standard for any creation now. And it's because everything's digital, it's a lot easier. But these were, mono track, starting with Steamboat Willie. So it was challenging and a lot of fun and very creative. And my shift, the first thing wasn't, starting. I had to start at the bottom again, because music business, post-production people, then a lot of them had been burned in the music business. So you couldn't say anything about the music, the M word. Yeah. And one person who I interviewed with, he says, "You may have been something in the music business, but here you're nothing." Mm-hmm. And he was going to pay me $7 an hour, and I just thought, well, I don't think so. I'm willing to start at the bottom, but that's below bottom, and that was just mean. Forget it.
I had a similar experience when I first came to Los Angeles. I was told, don't tell anybody that you're from Berklee School of Music.
Oh, really?
And I was a teacher there, and I went there, and the word was that it just had a bad rep, so you shouldn't say anything. But I was visiting a friend at A&M, an engineer also from Berklee, who I met there, is still an old friend, cleaning up after a session. And there were 7 people in the studio. And one guy heard me talk about Berklee with my friend, and next thing you know, all the other 5 people, their ears pick up. Oh, I went to Berklee. Really? I didn't know that. You went to Berklee? And next thing you know, all of us had been to Berklee, but because of the stigma of it, no one said a word about it. No one knew. So I don't know if that continues, but that's the way it was then.
Well, my impression of anybody who's a Berklee grad is pretty good.
Well, yes, but what it was the reputation. I still think that there's some of that today. Kind of fool yourself.
Oh.
Because, you feel that you know more than you actually do. One of those things. But
oh, well, the first thing that I think happens when you actually go to work is you find out how much you don't know.
Yeah, how true.
The school was great to get that ball rolling, but boy, the real education was on the scene, and in the session, and in the studio, and boy, it was really clear that there was so much more about creating music and recording good music and inspiring and capturing good music, and the attitude in the room, and all of those subtleties that are acquired, and you just have to soak it up and learn it.
And it's kind of a drag that really that doesn't happen so much because there's not as many commercial studios, so there's not that opportunity. And then everybody's used to recording in their own home studio, and usually it's just one other person, if that. They're not real players. I mean, there's that whole wealth of industrial knowledge, so to speak, that's kind of falling by the wayside.
And the social skills, I taught at a recording school for about 8 years as an adjunct instructor here and there, I loved it because I could still record, but I could teach classes, which I loved teaching. And the first class I taught was studio protocols and procedures. And so I created a curriculum for it where I was basically training them all to work for me, to be assistants for me.
Yeah.
And I told them that. I said, this is a very selfish endeavor of mine. I'm here making sure that if I walk into a studio and any one of you are in there, I know you've got my back. And one of the main things was that, I taught them about hygiene and being quiet and listening. And a lot of studios don't have all the new gear that you guys are learning on, and they don't care. And they love their OS9 and their Pro Tools 7.4, and go with it and learn how to fix stuff. And but I would say, it's a service industry that you're going into. You're providing a service. So you have to create an environment that makes those clients feel so appreciated, and they love being there, creating. They're safe and inspired, and they'll tell other people. And that includes things like cutting their lemons in quarters instead of slices, and making sure you have ESPN and, all of the amenities. And the students later came back to me and told me, out of everything they learned at the school, was that it said that was the most important class they took. And they said, you were absolutely right. It is all about the ESPN.
Yeah. There is a school that does that. It's Nimbus in Vancouver, which is Bob Ezrin's school. And Bob put it together because he couldn't find assistants that he liked. And he thought, well, I might as well teach them my way. And I have to say, it's one of the best schools I've ever been to, from the standpoint that these people really know what they're doing, and they're incentivized to work hard. They have a thing called Nimbus Bucks, which basically means that you can't get studio time unless you develop this cachet of Nimbus Bucks. And the way you do it is by going to class, doing all of your homework, showing up when you're supposed to, and then you build up this that you can then trade in for studio time, which I thought, boy, that is so brilliant.
That is. That's like a gold star chart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's, that is total incentive. And that was one thing that I thought I noticed about students. I'd always ask who wants, is this a hobby for you, or do you want to have a career doing this? And you could tell who was going to evolve in the industry. And there are others, because they would have the opportunity to, use studio time, and there were studios there. And a lot of them wouldn't book it. They'd just go to somebody's house and get stoned or something. I don't know. But there were the ones who were, who got it, that boy, once I get out of school, I'm going to have to pay for this time. And so they were in there every chance they got. And, you couldn't help. So when you couldn't help noticing that they were going to succeed on some level. So it made it easy for when recording studios would come to me. Do you have any students you could recommend? Yeah.
I was looking over the number of associations and causes that you're affiliated with, and one showed up that I wasn't familiar with. That's Women in Vinyl. What is that?
Yes. Oh, they're wonderful. Gosh. Yeah, it's global. Oh, you check them out.
Okay.
They have, it's about collecting as well as manufacturing. There's one woman who cuts up in Toronto. She has her own disc mastering, and they're just all over the country and very supportive. They have record stores. They do distribution. They do just all sorts of stuff. It's a passion sort of thing.
Okay, I'll check it out. Definitely.
Yeah. There's a lot of women in vinyl.
All right, last question, Lenise. Thanks so much for your time. This is very cool. I'm glad we could talk more, and I can find out more about your past, because you have a big history. Best way I can put it.
A woman with a promising past.
Okay.
I got a future too, and present's not so bad.
Yeah, right. Okay, last question. What's the best piece of advice that maybe somebody imparted to you or you learned along the way?
Well, do what makes you happy and create balance in your life. But do that thing that brings you joy because you only have one life and this is it. And so if you're passionate about something, then go for it. And opportunities will arise because your energy will attract them. I know. And so don't be afraid to do that. And again, if people tell you no, look for people who tell you how.
You can find out more about Lenise at lenisebent.com. That's Lenise, Lenise, Bent, B-E-N-T, lenisebent.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. You can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news when you sign up for my newsletter at bobbyowsinski.com. There you'll also find out about openings for my latest online classes and special events. That's bobbyowsinski.com. To listen to the episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to bobbyowsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to bobbyowinnercircle.com, or you can find it in Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, Mixcloud, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, and Podbean. At bobbyowsinski.com and bobbyowinnercircle.com, you'll also find a sign-in form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.